Hello and welcome to the Booktopia podcast. I'm Olivia Fricot, Senior Content Producer and Editor of the Booktopian blog, and joining me today is our Lifestyle Books Category Manager, Shanu Prasad. Our guest today is quite special, someone that Shanu and I are very eager to chat to. He's the acclaimed Artistic Director of the Australian Ballet, having been part of the company since 1983, first as a member of the ballet school, then as a senior and principal artist, and has also just released a memoir called Soar, A Life Freed by Dance. Today's guest is, of course, David McAllister. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Olivia. It's great to be with you.
It's great to have you on the podcast. Shanu and I are quite big ballet fans. We've both read and loved Soar. It's a wonderful read. It's available now. Let's get right into it. First of all, what made you want to write this memoir and how did you start?
Look, I've got to say it was something that sort of came via the publisher, Thames and Hudson. They sort of contacted me to say whether I was interested in doing a memoir. And I didn't really think my life was that interesting, actually. And so they did a bit of sort of talking to me about it. And look, in short term, they sort of appealed to my vanity in a way. But I did say at the time, look, I just don't think I've got time, with everything that was ramping up towards my departure from the Australian Ballet. And so that's when they introduced me to the idea of working with Amanda Dunn to actually do the book. And that all of a sudden made it much more possible. And I knew Amanda as an amazing writer, journalist through The Age. And she'd written a lot about dance, so I knew she knew the subject. And then we met and we started talking, and it just sort of all fell into place from there. And then from then on, it was really a different experience to what I thought it was going to be. I felt it was almost like going through therapy because, you delve back into parts of your life that you had sort of just locked away, or not locked away, but, just put away. And, in all of our busy lives, I think you're always sort of looking forward and thinking what's going to happen next. So it was a really interesting chance to dig back into the memory pool, and it turned out to be a really enjoyable experience. And Amanda would give me sort of writing tasks. So I wrote a lot about my early years and my first ballet classes, and obviously we did a lot of. She recorded a lot of conversations as well, and I also wrote a lot about the personal things, like the personal relationships. So so it was a great project that I didn't feel that I have to tackle all by myself because I've never written a book. But I really enjoyed the process of sort of cataloguing and writing and the editing process, which was like digging into a whole new world that I'd never experienced before.
Was there a lot of change to the structure of the book? You imagined when you started to how it ended up in the final, the final finished out there in the world edition?
It really was, actually. And I guess, I'm a big fan of biographies. I love reading memoirs and biographies. So I assumed that, it would sort of be chronological. But Amanda sort of said, no, we need to get a hook to get people in to, start. So that was the prologue, really. And that was her idea. And then we went back to a more sort of linear sort of time frame, which is what I thought it would be like. And, it's not until you actually get into this that you realize that there's a whole lot of your life that you've never really talked about. So that was sort of not confronting, but it was just really interesting to think, gosh, what are people going to think when they read this? Especially the 77 dancers in the Australian Ballet currently. So that was sort of an interesting feeling. But yeah, I guess once we had the structure, which I think, I can honestly say Amanda was pretty much in the forefront of that, then filling in was so much easier, and it was really enjoyable. And as I say, it was fun to relive some of the moments, and interesting to relive others.
Yes, I can imagine. When I was reading the book, I was like, I can't imagine you just managed to fit so much into into your life, and just every experience after every experience was just quite incredible. So I think that actually leads Liv into her next question, which was beautifully done.
I was wondering, David, your career with the Australian Ballet has obviously spanned over 30 years, incorporating like dance, choreography, artistic direction. How did you find the creative process of writing compared to that of dance?
It was a really different experience, and I guess while I was dancing, I never really did any sort of text-based writing or even, working on a computer, because pretty much as a dancer, your whole life is spent in a studio, looking yourself in the mirror and perfecting, movement. So to actually switch over into that sort of other side of the brain, I guess I'd had a bit of experience with writing because I write all of my program forwards and, boring, I shouldn't say boring, but, important sort of document stuff like board papers and stuff. So I had done a little bit of that, but to writing in a more creative way, I guess, not that I was making it up, but, in that sort of way that people are going to read for enjoyment was a different style, I think. And so I guess I tried to write when I was doing the bits that I was writing as if I was just talking. And look, I've got to say, English was, I loved English at school and I loved creative writing and doing all that sort of stuff. But growing up, I was a bit of a remedial reader. And so I think I came to the writing through a different sort of path. And I felt very confident that knowing that Amanda was such a beautiful writer that, anything that I was going to add would be sort of updated and beautified and made. I tend to do this thing where I write backwards, and my EA tells me all the time, I put too many ideas into a sentence and I tend to flip it around the wrong way. So she's always editing me as I go. So the editing process wasn't that unusual.
I think you've had some experience with that.
Yeah.
What I do love about it is that it's immediately obvious that you have this real appreciation for beauty and wonder, like right down to the small details. And it's obvious, like you begin the book from your childhood in Perth, and like you talk about dressing up as a child, the oil of your line that your mother used, the wallpaper in your Melbourne flat, that kind of thing, which is just wonderful to read and kind of experience the world of, a creative child through your eyes. It must have been an incredible relief to you that your parents let you foster that and let you pursue your dreams of dance.
Yeah. Look, I don't think they had any option because I was gonna do it no matter what. And I think there were times where they would both look at each other, looking at me going, what the hell is this child? I was always lost in this sense of creativity and make-believe, and it was when I was happiest. And I talk about when I go to school, how it was such a shock to leave that behind and into, a much more regimented world. And I guess that's what I loved about going to ballet classes, was that I stepped back into that world of, imagination, but through the lens of a very rigorous sort of training regime, which completely obsessed me. So I sort of found my way of learning and becoming more regimented through the escape into the ballet studio, which sounds a bit weird, but and it's so funny because when we were talking with Amanda and myself, she kept asking me, what was it like? How did you feel? What were the things you remember from that time? And all of those little details were things that just kept flooding back to me. Like I remember when I first walked into the studio, when I did my first ballet class, apart from the sea of girls in little pink leotards, was the sense of, the stage at the other end of this hall, which was so beautiful. And, being in Perth, it was the light that sort of came into the room, and the fact that the light illuminated all this dust, because it was a pretty old, dusty place. And the magic of that sort of, it always stayed with me, I think images and, smells and feelings are the sorts of things that really illuminate your memory. And so I guess I tried to add some of that into the book so people sort of could imagine that feeling as well.
I really loved the section. It was a little, section when you first went to class, and your parents were like, "Well, we'll just see how long this phase lasts for," and so they didn't buy you real ballet shoes. They made you wear the jiffies. And I remember that from my own childhood, not having just the right ballet leotard. When I went to my first class, I had like a pink swimsuit, and just feeling that this is no. I'm doing ballet. I need to have the right ballet leotard. So when was it that you were allowed to move from the jiffies to your first actual ballet shoes?
Look, I think it was about a month in. I certainly wore the jiffies for quite a number of weeks, but when it was looking a bit more sort of like we were in for the long haul, I got my beautiful new, I think they were Paul Wright ballet shoes, and they were made out of that beautiful soft kid leather, but and they were really tiny. I kept them for a while and then I threw them out because it was like they were, you know, had holes in them and stuff. But it was a pretty special. I remember the step up from jiffies to the ballet shoes were a big event, and I think it was my parents' point of, you know, giving in. They realised that it was, you know, they were in this for the longer haul.
Many pairs of ballet shoes to come after that.
Yes.
Yeah. Another thing about Soar is it's just like learning of the word jiffies, which I had to go and Google. Like it was just such an interesting insight into the world of ballet, because I mean I did tap and jazz growing up, but I always looked at ballet and thought, oh, that looks really interesting, but also just so much going on with it. So what was really interesting was just seeing like getting that back insight into the Australian ballet in particular, just like the politics and the structure and the hierarchy and how you navigated that as a first year dancer, especially when that all began to be kind of upheaved.
It was a really interesting time to join the company too, because I feel like when I was at school and the strike happened, I always, you know, tell people I think it was the beginning of the modern version of the Australian Ballet. I think prior to that, it was very much the pioneering years of the company, and it was that sort of schism between management and the dancers which really turned the corner into building a very much more modern environment for the company and you know, the next phase, I guess, of the development. And so I was really lucky to have been there at that time and to see the changes, you know, from when I joined, where, you know, it was very hierarchical and, you know, you knew your place and you didn't sort of step out of your place. And it was Manon Gielgud who really sort of challenged all of that and turned it around, or, you know, modernized that relationship thing where everyone, you know, you were all dancers and you were all equal to your ability. And that came with growing pains. And I guess I was lucky I was one of the young ones, so I wasn't that ingrained into the system. And, you know, it meant because she really pushed young dancers that we got a lot of opportunities, and I think we were seen as threatening to some of the older dancers. And then, of course, you know, over time, you know, dance careers, we like to joke that a dance career is like a year in dance is like a dog's life. You know, it's a year, you live 7 years in 1 year of your career. So, you know, very quickly I became one of the senior dancers, and then, you know, you start that feeling of the dancers coming behind and how, you know, that affects you. So, yeah, that sense of evolution within the organization is something that I guess I talk a bit about. And also for me, I mean, I was lucky enough to be there and work with every single artistic director before I was appointed. So I sort of know where all the bodies are buried, if you know what I mean.
I thought that was actually one of the most amazing parts, because we, you know, the Australian Ballet, as we know it, was only established in the 1962.
1962, that's right. Yeah.
So they really, you know, you really have had that like an experience that no one else is going to be able to say that they've had. You know, it really is a unique experience. And I think for anyone that's at all been interested in ballet, and, you know, the world of ballet in Australia, they're going to find so much more information than they might have remembered from, because I remember reading the news and I remember the big deal, you know, with I think towards Manon Gielgud's leaving, and then Ross Stretton, the next artistic director, coming in, you know, and all that kind of, you know, stuff in the papers about, you know, dancers being upset and, you know, what's going to happen with this, you know, with him coming in from America and all this kind of stuff. And so one of the great things about the book is that you really do give a real insider's view into what it was like for the actual dancers at the time. So I really appreciate that you've have taken the time to write that into your memoir as well. Just going back a little bit though, what do you think it was about Perth in the time when you were there that managed to, you know, produce, you know, when you went to the Australian Ballet, you went with Stephen Heathcote,
Paul Mercurio
and
Darren Spowett.
Exactly. So you have, and there was only 18 boys in the Australian Ballet like in your
in that
class,
intake, yeah,
in that
there were 18 boys and 4
and
from
4
Perth.
from WA.
Yeah. It was
Especially-
a high proportion.
Yeah. So what was happening there? Do you know?
I think, look, at that time, I think in Perth, there was great teachers. And, you know, things always seem to go in waves. And it just happened that period of time, there was a lot of good boys. And interestingly, Stephen, Paul and Darren all knew each other and had done, you know, things together.
Oh.
And I was the one who was they always used to joke that I must have been locked in a cupboard somewhere, because it wasn't until the ballet school audition, that I was sort of turned out. But yeah, it was an amazing time. And I think for me, great in one way to be able to go with, you know, other guys from Perth, but also when I first saw them there at the audition, I thought, oh my God, you know, I'd auditioned 2 years before and had been accepted, but my parents wouldn't let me go. And I thought, now when the, you know, pressure's on and I really want to go, I'm not going to get chosen. But luckily we all did. So I think Perth is an interesting place too, because it is so isolated, and you do feel isolated growing up in Perth. And so I remember reading a thing about Rudolf Nureyev, where he said, you know, he was in Ufa and it was in the middle of nowhere in Siberia. And he thought if he just worked really hard, eventually someone would find him. And that's pretty much how I felt in Perth. So it was a place that I think, you know, you could just get lost in your own world. So I was very excited when I did actually get to audition for the ballet school both times, and know that there were other guys there and that we were all sort of heading over together.
Yeah, I mean, there must have been, you do talk a lot in the book about, you know, the experience you've had at school, and, you know, I think a very common experience, unfortunately, for boys that decide to do ballet then. And I think you're saying even now, there's still this really strange misconception that somehow doing ballet makes you less masculine, even though you know that most boys could never do half of the things that dancers can actually do. Every time you see any kind of, you know, thing with footballers trying to do ballet, it's quite amusing. Yeah. So how did you feel? Like, what was that feeling when you discovered that there were, like, was it really at that audition that was really the first time that you felt, hey, maybe there are other, you know, maybe I'm not so strange, or did you know, was it your family that helped you earlier, kind of like absorb sort of, you know, I think you talk about your sister a lot.
Yeah.
Your sister died, one of your sort of a confidant of yours, to try and, you know, how did your family and you know, how did that kind of work? Sorry, this is a terrible question.
Look, I had a big family because, you know, we were Catholic, so there was a lot of us. And I think that was a real bonus for me because, you know, there was so many people at home. I didn't have to go searching for friends. And, you know, I was so excited about learning ballet initially, I told everyone. And of course, then realized what a terrible social mistake I'd made. So, yeah, school wasn't a great time for me. And I had a few very close friends who really supported me. But I think it was my family that actually made a lot of that a whole lot better. And my parents, you know, especially my mum, because, you know, she was on the coalface, you know, when I come home, you know, upset about things. And she was just very pragmatic and very, you know, she didn't sort of get all, you know, emotional and funny about it. She just sort of said, you know, very sensibly, well, just ignore them and they'll go away. Which, you know, at the time I thought, well, that's not really that helpful. But I think in the end, what she was doing was saying, you know, this will pass, you know, as they say now. And she was absolutely right. But it was really great to have that really hard rock of support around the home. And I've got to say that the friends who I had, you know, at school were incredible supporters because, you know, they certainly didn't pick an easy road being my friend. And it wasn't really until year 11 and 12 that I realized once the girls came, because, you know, all boys' schools are very, you know, tribal in a way. And when the girls came, everything became much more agreeable. And, you know, we were at that age, you know, 15, 16, where all of a sudden the boys were much more interested in the girls than interested in me. So that was really fantastic. I was very happy with that. And, you know, those last 2 years of school became quite productive and enjoyable. So, but yeah, I found the decision to do what I did was not a hard one. You know, I didn't struggle with it because I was so passionate about it. There was no alternative. And I just thought that everyone else was a little bit sort of weird that they couldn't get how exciting and fabulous this was to be a dancer.
Yeah, that's the incredible thing that really comes across in Soar is your intense love and passion for ballet. And you write about it with such love, even though it made you the target of some of that bullying and ire. But you also at the same time didn't shy away from writing about how much of a toll that ballet can take on you, both physically and emotionally. I was wondering if you thought about how you would achieve that balance of honesty while writing your book.
Sorry, I keep doing that, don't I? I felt that if I was going to do this, I had to do it honestly. I couldn't just gloss over and say, I mean, first of all, it would have been really boring if I just said, you know, all the lovely things that happened and, you know, I went to ballet and it was all fabulous and then I went home and went to bed. You know, it was sort of like there was more to it than that. And I think for every, you have to experience the bad times to know what the good times are like. And equally, when the good times are so fantastic, you know, you've got to know that it's not always like that. You know, I think we have that thing of, you know, when we look at people's lives, especially when you don't know some of the backstory, you know, it can look like it's all just, you know, glorious and people just get this, you know, easy ride on the conveyor belt to happiness. And I don't think anyone has that experience, even the most successful or, you know, seemingly charmed lives. There's always, you know, the balance of the darker side. And I guess for me, it was also in this book, I just thought if I'm going to talk about myself, I need to talk about it warts and all. And I'm not one of those people that likes to blow my own trumpet. So, you know, I wanted to be really honest about my shortcomings as well. Shortcomings being, you know, being short. Not just, you know, say I was amazing and I was fabulous and, you know, I was so successful, because it's never really like that.
And it's also interesting to think about that in terms of how much ballet culture itself has changed, particularly in terms of the pressures that would be placed on dancers to look a certain way, you know, to not be short, to not have, you know, big noses or whatever. And it's incredible that how you talk about that you had this determination to prove them wrong, to show that there is room for that kind of physical diversity. What are the things that you think has fostered that change in ballet culture from the early 80s to now?
I think just society. Ballet is always a greatly influenced and is a sort of in some ways a mirror up to society. And so, you know, in the 80s, if you look in, you know, the fashion world or just generally, you know, it was all about Jane Fonda doing keep fit videos and everyone being thin, you know, it was, and there wasn't that lens, I guess, of wellness and health that I think we've come to more recently. So it was just all very external. It was about how you looked, how thin you were, how tall you were, how talented you were. But the talent sort of came after the visual. And look, ballet is a very aesthetic art form. I mean, you know, let's face it, it's, you know, it does have quite a rigorous, you know, aesthetic and what you need to fit into. And it's not even just, you know, the way you look, it's also what you physically can do. You know, you need to be externally rotated. You need to have very good, flexible, you know, feet and joints. And so, I mean, there's a whole lot of rigors that you have to jump through to just be a ballet dancer. But I think what's happened more recently is that as society has accepted more change and more diversity, so has ballet. And, you know, when I joined the company, everyone was Anglo-Celtic. I mean, there was no, and if you weren't, you looked Anglo-Celtic. Like, you know, you may have a background, you know, a Greek or Italian, but, you know, you had that European sort of look. And the first dancer that I remember being in the company who was non-European, the word was, I mean, she came from a, you know, Singaporean background, and, you know, it was sort of said to her face, oh, well, you don't look too Asian, you know, and that to me was horrifying, even at that time. But now, you know, people who come and see the ballet sometimes say to me, oh, the company's very, you know, multicultural. And I sort of go, are they? I don't even notice. It's sort of like, you know, we have we have dancers who are from China, Japan. We have, I mean, the bulk of the company are Australian residents, but, you know, they have Malay Chinese, they have Filipino, they have, you know, Vietnamese, all sorts of different, you know, ethnic mixes, which is what Australia is. And it's so weird because I just don't even notice that the company looks, you know, different ethnically or, and look, physically I do notice because I do go and see other companies and I realize, oh, you know, our guys are very healthy looking and they look fit and, you know, the women look like women and the men look like men, not in a, you know, in a sort of stereotypical way, but like, you know, they all have strong, you know, fit looking bodies. But there's still that, you know, aesthetic of line and you know, an appealing sort of ability to make, you know, lovely shapes. But they don't all look like they need to go home and have a good meal, which is something that I think is really important because, you know, to do what you need to do to be a ballet dancer, you have to be able to have the muscles in your body to actually achieve it. And that's what I guess we were all trying not to do back in the 80s.
Yeah, it's actually amazing. Some of the stories you tell in the book. I think one of the ones that I was like, oh my goodness, how times have changed has got to be about the smoking and just smoking like during or just after rehearsals or having like a little tray, like a, I can't remember what they're called now. I just don't know. Ashtray, that's the one. Yeah, just there for the dancers, just to, you know, put their cigarettes into, and just the thought of that now is just. It's absolutely amazing how much has changed in 30, 40 years in thinking. And I think you talk about, right, that when you were, you know, a younger dancer, that it was about performing all the time and performing through your injuries. None of this kind of, you know, sports science that we have now that explains that if you take 2 days off now, you might actually be, you know, fine. Whereas if you don't take those 2 days off now, you might end up with, you know, a 3 month recovery time or something.
Yeah.
So I think that just some of those stories were just unbelievable, and what you guys danced through was like, wow.
Well, I think also we just didn't have the knowledge that we do now, and you know, I mean, sadly, there are still places around the world where they have a similar sort of, you know, approach, but just because that's the way it always was, and you know, I think you have to break that chain, you know, to be able to go, okay, well, that's the way it was when we were doing it, but now there's a better way. And interestingly, you know, our medical artistic health team are recognized around the world as, you know, groundbreaking and world's best practice. And it really is just because we've gone, there's a better way of doing this. And, you know, it's a bit like, you know, when we talk about climate change, listen to the scientists, you know, the scientists know best. And that's what we've sort of done. And now, interestingly, people talk about the Australian approach as opposed to being, you know, this is the medical best practice approach. So we're really proud of that.
I was going to say, yeah, that's definitely something to be proud of. I mean, that's why David Hallberg, who is actually taking over after you, that's why he came to Australia, right, when he injured himself? Was so that he could go through the program here. Yeah,
he had a very nasty injury that then he had a surgery for that then was, you know, pretty tricky, and yeah, he basically came to us with a one-way ticket and said, you know, not you're my last hope, but you know, if anyone's going to fix this, you are. And he not submitted, that's a terrible, you know, he completely got on board with the process, and it took him 15 months. I mean, I think a lot longer than he ever thought it was going to, but you know, he got back to full dancing, and I think in the process got to understand the company and the environment, and you know, thankfully it's led to his appointment as my successor, which is brilliant.
There you go, from David to David.
Yes.
Speaking of the artistic, being the artistic director, how you came to be the artistic director of the Australian Ballet. Now that is a story of very much interest in the book. Do you want to just tell us, not give too much away, because you know everyone wants to read the book, but just tell us a little bit about what that time in your life was like.
Yeah, it was around the time that I was about 36. I think I just turned 36, and I was thinking, you know, there's going to be life. You know, I have to think about life after dance. Not that I wanted to, but it was something I had to think about. And so I started doing an arts administration course through Deakin University off campus. And it was through doing that, and then Ross Stretton announcing that he was leaving the company, it sort of led me towards this idea of, oh, maybe, maybe that's something that I'd be involved in. And it was mentioned and in the press. And I guess I'd had a bit of a plan, a long-term plan that, I thought eventually one day I'd like to do that. And so I guess the stars aligned, and I applied really just to be, seen, for me to go through a process like that, just as for experience, because I'd never auditioned for a job. And I think I say in the book, a 2-minute Dong Q variation wasn't going to cut it.
I was just imagining that. Can you imagine? Going before the board. Let me show you my credentials.
Yeah, I'm just going to do my variation from Act 3 of Don Quixote. So it started off as an experience of discovery, and it turned up to be, my future. So it was a very interesting time. And I think I also say in the book, if I had have known then what I know now, I look back and think, my God, the ignorance is bliss when you're in that sort of situation. But if I did know more and hadn't applied, I think I would have always regretted it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to focus for a moment, continuing on that theme. I want to focus for a moment on the title of the book, which is Soar, A Life Freed by Dance, because I think it's very telling. So this is a memoir about ballet, but it's also about your own personal journey, career-wise, but also towards accepting your sexuality. And the interesting thing is how your dance career and your personal life have gone hand in hand and been kind of so inextricably linked. What do you think your life journey might have looked like if you'd never discovered ballet?
Oh, that's such a good question, because I feel like ever since my first memory of myself is dancing. So I don't imagine what my life would have been like without ballet. And I think it's so sort of crafted, I guess, in the way the person I was, all of the, crazy things as well as the good things. So I sort of can't imagine. I think I probably would have been very frustrated. I think I would have always been searching for that thing that I could never find, because pretty much as soon as I found dance, it just made everything else make sense. So obviously with my grappling with my sexuality, that was a part of it. But I think that was also linked with dance. I mean, for me, princes always have swans or princesses, and that was sort of what I thought. And my, growing up in a Catholic family in a fairly religious sort of environment, I thought that was, just going to be what happened. But it was when I realized that I was drawn to Kelvin, which, happens in the prologue, that it sort of really set me on a bit of not a path of discovery, because I don't think I actually really discovered a lot about myself until I was much older. But then, later in my life, having relationships with wonderful women who, really validated that that my belief that, that sort of normal life was what I wanted, to the point where I thought that that's where I was heading. And then, eventually just went, I think there's a problem here. Houston, we have a problem. But I didn't really admit all of that to myself until, I was in my 40s. So, I mean, a bit of a slow learner when it comes to personal life. I think I invested so much time in my career, I was just putting everything else on hold.
You've also written a lot of your vulnerability and insecurity into this book, and about never quite feeling cool enough or comfortable in yourself. Like, obviously you're a comfortable dancer, but what's beautiful is that this is a hopeful story, a hopeful book, one in which you do triumph and you do get your rom-com moments. We're running kind of short on time, so I just wanted to ask, what do you think you would say to your younger self just starting out in the Australian Ballet School?
I think I would have said, don't always have your eye so far on the future. Enjoy the moment, because I think that's the thing I've learned through my life. Don't be so worried about what everyone else thinks about you. Don't be so worried about where you're heading. Just spend a few moments every so often just enjoying the moment and being, where you are. And probably, I would have taken a few more personal risks as a younger person. Not risk, but, you know, I think I probably should have explored my sexuality earlier. But look, having said all of that, I wouldn't change anything. I've really had a fantastic time, and I've learnt a lot, and I've experienced, you know, well beyond anything that I ever thought I would in my life. So, I mean, and this book is part of it. I've got to say, I never would have thought in a million years I would have written a memoir, even a couple of years ago. So it's all been a rich and wonderful experience. And, you know, the title Soar sort of made me laugh a little bit at first, because, you know, we jumped around with a whole lot of things. And I actually said we could also call it Soar, S-O-R-E. But I'm really happy with, you know, the way that it's come out. And I do think it's, you know, it's genuinely reflects my experience, I guess.
Fantastic. Yeah. Can we ask one last question? Because I always make the recordings go longer, because we never want to stop talking, because there's so much more that we can talk about. I don't know, no one can, because, you know, this is just audio, but I literally went through the entire book. And,
oh my God.
Stickered everything that I thought was, I was like, oh, I've got to ask about this. So, you know, if you've got another 4 hours, no, kidding. But my last question is, could you just give us a little something, a dancing anecdote from the book, some part of your career in that was just something that was just really memorable for you, that you really are excited to tell everyone about through the book?
Sure.
Gosh. I know it's hard because there's so many. I think you met like every single person in the ballet world. That was anyone in the ballet world pretty much over your career. But if you can just pick one, just one.
Pick one. Okay. I'm tossing up. Sorry. I think the two things that sort of stick out as far as being a dancer, I think, was the Princess Diana experience, because, you know, at that time, Princess Diana was the most famous woman in the world, and we were there just after the Andrew Morton book had been published. Oh, wow. So, you know, it was such a crazy time to be, you know, having the Princess of Wales sort of come, and, you know, we were all told we weren't allowed to mention the Andrew Morton book, but it made me realize, and the thing I think I learned all the way through my career with these extraordinary people that you just never thought you'd ever meet, was she was such a genuinely wonderful woman. Like, you know, even though she lived this very rarefied life, and, you know, she had her ups and downs as well, ultimately her talent was that she just made you feel like you were the most interesting person she'd ever met. And it was a gift. I mean, it was an incredible gift. And to having danced the performance that I was really happy with, and, you know, then meeting her and being sort of all like, you know, completely tongue-tied and couldn't get 2 words out, and then having the opportunity of actually sitting with her and having a normal conversation, if you can have a normal conversation with Princess Diana. It was one of those nights, I remember going home and just not being able to sleep. It was just like, I cannot believe that just happened. And I guess the other time like that as a director was when I met Barack Obama at the conference they had in Brisbane with all of the world leaders. And, you know, there was Angela Merkel and all these crazy people that, you know, we all sort of said hello to. But Barack Obama was the same. I mean, you know, he was just the most genuine, gentle, friendly, humorous, fantastic person. And I mean, like, I talked to him for about 3 minutes max. But you know, it just makes me, it always reminded me, no matter how famous or important people are, they're still just another human being. And that's always the most life-affirming experience, you know, when you have these experiences. And, you know, I suppose they're 2 of those moments that you just think, wow, that little daggy boy from Perth who, you know, no one liked at school, bingo.
Who would have thought?
Yeah.
It's just the most incredible story. Oh, sorry, Shanu.
Oh, no, I know. It's just the most incredible story. And I know we need to wrap up, but I've just got, one really last question this time, which is, what would you like people to remember about you and your time in the Australian Ballet? What would you like your legacy to be?
Well, that's a good question. I'll allow it.
Well, it's interesting when you talk about legacy, because all the way through my directorship, I always found that such a difficult thing. And I remember having a conversation with Richard Evans about it, and he said, you've got to think now, early on, this was my second year in the job, what your legacy will be. And so now I'm at the end of it. It's sort of interesting to look back. But I think what I hope people remember from my time at the ballet company is that it was an environment where people felt they could flourish. It was a place that was creative, dynamic, and but also supportive and nourishing. And often ballet companies can be seen as pits of intrigue and also competition, and there's always that in our company as well. But I think within that competition, there's still also a really great respect for each other and for the art form and for the the work that we do. And the work always fluctuates. I mean, not every performance is brilliant, not every ballet you commission works, but the fact that there was an environment that people could create and could perform at their very best and evolve in a very supportive environment. I think that's what I would like people to think of my time at the ballet. And and ultimately I wanted to make sure that I left the company in a strong and hopefully better position than I took it on. And apart from COVID, which has sort of given us a bit of a kick in the shins, I think it is.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us, David.
It was a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a great pleasure for us. And for everyone listening at home, you can order your copy of Soar, A Life Breathed by Dance from booktopia.com.au. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Booktopia podcast channel. Don't forget, you can subscribe to us on SoundCloud and iTunes for free and get access to hundreds of author discussions, book analysis pieces, and more. Or, if your eyes need a workout, head to Booktopia TV on YouTube. Don't forget, for all books featured in this podcast and for access to a whole bunch of other fun content on our blog, head to Booktopia, Australia's local bookstore, at booktopia.com.au.